everyone, and thank you so much for watching Signs and Wonders. We're definitely living in some strange, perilous times these days, and we're seeing a lot of end times biblical prophecy unfolding all around the world and all over the news, which we're going to address in this video. But first, I would just like to give a massive thank you to all my Patreons and everyone who's made a PayPal donation. I can't thank you guys enough for helping me spread this message. Thank you so much, guys. So in the last video, we talked a little bit about global food shortages and how this virus has affected the world's food delivery system. In Matthew 24, the well-known verses where Jesus tells his followers the signs of the end times, one of those signs is famines.
For this farm in Minnesota, it's just a matter of time. The world's biggest meat companies have halted operations at more than a dozen huge slaughterhouses in North America, and millions of pigs, chickens and cows will be euthanized.
At some point, if we aren't able to market hogs, something will have to give. We just won't have enough space to house all the animals that we have.
There's been a waste of human life as well, as the coronavirus spread rapidly in slaughterhouses across the US, with large chunks knocked off production capacity and industry leaders warning of nationwide shortages. Donald Trump invoked emergency powers at the end of April, declaring the closure of meatpacking plants a threat to critical infrastructure.
We solved that problem yesterday. I expect to see the supply chain as strong as ever.
Drought has hit the African continent. A United Nations report says that in the nation of Ethiopia, between 50,000 and 100 persons, mostly women and children, are severely lacking food. Some reports show 1,000 persons per week are still said to be dying of starvation. Farther west, below the Sahara Desert, millions of people are in danger of starvation in what has been called the worst drought in Africa's recorded history. Meanwhile, Asia suffers from a sweeping rice shortage. The Asian rice stock per person, according to some estimates, is the lowest in 30 years, and prices have skyrocketed to 200 to 300%. In the last few decades, we have seen our fish and oceans decimated like never before. In Revelation chapter 8 verse 9 we read, "A third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed." The Australian seafood industry, reeling from disrupted supply chains and coronavirus lockdowns, is expected to fall in value by at least $400 million this year.
The Hawkesbury River is well known for its fresh oysters. Sheridan Beaumont's farm has been operating here for more than a decade, but now it's in survival mode. Earlier this year, she lost about half her crop to floods and hot weather. Then coronavirus hit, closing restaurants and wholesale markets, and she can't sell what's left.
It's been a very difficult time for everyone, and that's everyone in this area as well, and I assume that all oyster farmers are probably going through the same thing, given that 90% of our oysters probably are sold to restaurants directly.
Like others, Sheridan is being forced to quickly adapt, looking to sell online, delivering directly to consumers, but she's still navigating exactly how it will work. Downstream, lobster prices have plummeted. When exports to China halted, Mark Cranstone was forced to shut down, costing the business about $200,000. He's now selling to local markets, but it's hard to make a profit. Prawns and abalone have also lost value. The Australian seafood industry as a whole is predicted to fall in value by at least $400 million this financial year.
The leasing price that we've already paid is about $10 less than what we were getting for our lobsters, so by the time you're trying to run boats, pay staff, you're pretty much running at a loss.
These lobsters would normally sell for about $50 each. Now they're worth about half of that.
That has forced producers to rethink the way they get their food onto people's plates, but the challenges ahead are daunting. Another end-time sign we're seeing more and more of these days is global unrest, riots and protests and that sort of thing. Nation shall rise against nation, and then in Matthew 24 verse 12 we read, "And because of iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold." Police in Hong Kong have broken up protests in several major shopping centers. Despite social distancing controls, Hong Kong is seeing a revival of anti-government demonstrations.
It's the first weekend since Hong Kong's strict social distancing rules were eased. Many shops and restaurants opened expecting celebrations for Mother's Day. Instead, there were scenes like this in several shopping malls across the city. Protesters would appear in different parts of the mall, then disperse as soon as there was word that police were on their way.
Having dinners with mom on a Mother's Day is a tradition, isn't it? So I find it really annoying, and I have no idea why the police are so aggressive.
Protesters gathered spontaneously to chant slogans and sing, and in line with the day's theme, calling for independence for Hong Kong. The chants for independence are likely to provoke Beijing and the Hong Kong government, whom the protesters say had taken advantage of the coronavirus outbreak to crack down on the city's democracy movement.
In the midst of the coronavirus, the government has imposed restrictions on gathering and turned it into a crackdown on freedom of assembly, not only for the human rights of citizens, but also for religious activities. I think this is a gross violation of human rights.
Also, hundreds of Iraqis have returned to the streets after weeks of a coronavirus lockdown, demanding sweeping political and economic reforms, just days following the swearing in of a new government.
Protesters are back atop the barricades on Baghdad's Republican Bridge, demanding the downfall of a government that has only been in power for 3 days. Mustafa al-Kadhimi was confirmed as prime minister last Thursday, nearly 6 months after anti-government demonstrations forced his predecessor, Adel Abdel Mahdi, to step down. But people here see Kadhimi not as a chance to start over, but as the continuation of a system that has failed them.
In the beginning, every prime minister makes concessions, but we don't know what the end result will be. We're not protesting against one person, we are protesting against all parties. All the parties inside parliament are still the same, so nothing will change.
Since March, Tahrir Square has been largely deserted after the government imposed a nationwide lockdown to contain the spread of coronavirus. The curfew has since been partly lifted. This is the largest demonstration here in Tahrir Square in 2 months. And even though the numbers are lower compared to last October, protesters today have managed to send a clear message that simply replacing the head of state is not enough to make the movement go away.
Armed protesters stormed the Michigan state capitol on Thursday as officials debated an extension of the state's COVID-19 lockdown as similar protests erupt across the country.
Protesters stormed the state capitol in Lansing, Michigan Thursday, demanding to be allowed onto the House floor as Michigan lawmakers debated an extension to Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer's emergency coronavirus orders. Whitmer extended Michigan's state of emergency orders until May 28th, a move that will keep many businesses closed, particularly bars, restaurants, and casinos, while opening some other retail establishments and allowing people to use parks, boats, and to play golf. Still, protesters, some wearing bulletproof vests and armed with guns, demanded the entire order be lifted and the entire state be allowed to reopen. So far, there are more than 41,000 coronavirus cases in Michigan, with close to 4,000 deaths. President Trump tweeted his support for the protests in Michigan, writing, quote, "The governor of Michigan should give a little and put out the fire. These are very good people, but they are angry. They want their lives back again safely. See them, talk to them, make a deal." The scene in Michigan is one of several other recent protests against state coronavirus emergency orders. In Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, April 20th, hundreds of people protested the governor's shutdown orders there through May 8th.
Meanwhile, the NYPD broke up a Hasidic Jewish funeral for a well-known rabbi in Brooklyn, where hundreds of mourners had gathered in defiance of social distancing orders.
Another scene unfolded this week that made headlines, this one in Brooklyn, New York, where the NYPD, on orders from New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio, broke up a Hasidic Jewish funeral for a well-known rabbi, where hundreds of mourners at least packed the streets. De Blasio blasted the gathering, tweeting, "Something absolutely unacceptable happened in Williamsburg tonight, a large funeral gathering in the middle of this pandemic. When I heard, I went there myself to ensure the crowd was dispersed, and what I saw will not be tolerated so long as we are fighting the coronavirus." De Blasio followed up with another tweet saying he instructed the NYPD to start handing out tickets or even arrest anyone gathering in large groups, writing, "This is about stopping this disease and saving lives, period." He later apologized for lashing out at the mourners, saying he spoke out of passion and frustration and has great love and respect for New York's
And just
Jewish
like it says in
community.
Matthew 24:12, because of evil being everywhere, the love of many will grow cold. Well, this next story doesn't really get any darker. It kind of reminded me of a demonic vampires trying to take advantage of people for greed in any way possible. Antibody-rich blood of recovered COVID-19 patients is actually being sold on the dark web now, and people are shooting the stuff in their arms, thinking it will prevent them from getting COVID.
Coronavirus behind this pandemic hit the world so fast that there's still so much we don't know about it. And as a result, the fear and the misinformation being spread around has become a virus in and of itself. And the dark web is cashing in, selling hundreds of coronavirus-related items, including, it would seem, the blood of recovered coronavirus patients. According to a recent report from Australia's public broadcaster ABC News, online criminals are selling actual blood from people they say recovered from COVID-19 and developed the antibodies, so that other people can buy it and inject it into themselves as a passive vaccine. The technique is centuries old, taking the blood plasma from patients recovered from other flus and injecting it into other people so that they can use those antibodies to recover more quickly. It's being used now too in the age of coronavirus. So of course, why wouldn't the dark web
Well, thanks for watching, guys. If you're new here, please subscribe. Thank you guys for everything. Stay safe, and God bless you and your families.